Hello everyone, let's make an unusual introduction to the talk. Yeah. How many of you, a question, how many of you have ever needed in your professional career to create some kind of a dashboard, you know, with memories, support calls, a lot of hands raised, great. How about creating some logging system? A lot of, we got two hands, all right. All right, alerts also. And we all know this whole thing can really fast be very complicated. Now, what are our options as professionals? We either lazy, we deploy less, maintain it less, but usually we will pay a higher cost, or we deploy everything ourselves, we maintain everything by ourselves, and of course the prices will go down. We can take a third-party vendor or stuff like this. So, what our objective for today's talk? We will present an efficient monitoring, alerting, logging, and analytics solution that will be easy to deploy and maintain as code with GitOps principles. And we try to make it as low price as we can. Hello everyone. My name is Simon. I work as a senior DevOps engineer at VLabs. Okay, before that I worked at Checkmarks and one of its leading security products. And we implemented this solution that I called an open source observability solution deployed and maintained as code, that I like to call it Grafana as code. Whoever of you heard about Grafana, it's an open source solution. Okay, you have Grafana on cloud, but it's working on the Prometheus stack. Now, how will we build this solution? First, I call it the observability pyramid. The base, of course, is the infrastructure. Always the base of every observability pyramid is the infrastructure. We'll talk about health deployments and sidecars. Next up, we will talk about data sources, dashboards, and alerts as code. We will then talk about logs, and then how we deployed everything for multiple environments. And a quick table of contents. So again, Helm deployment, we will talk about the Prometheus stack. Sidecars, what are concept of sidecars in Grafana? Data sources, what data sources we can provision. Dashboards and alerts, we will learn how to provision dashboards and alerts as code. We will talk about Loki, this application logs, and wrap everything with GitOps principles. So Helm deployment and overview. Helm deployment of the Prometheus stack. Very easy. You just add the repository of Prometheus in Helm, you deployed it in your cluster, and you have everything up and running. Very easy. Now, we as DevOps, we like to know what will be deployed. So let's say, for example, you have your Kubernetes cluster, you have some kind of application runs in namespace A, some kind of application runs in namespace B, and for example, in the monitoring namespace, here's what will be deployed in the Helm we've just seen a minute ago. Of course, your Prometheus operator that will scan your application on port 8080, a node exporter, a kube state matrix, an alert manager for alerts, and of course, the Grafana also in the stack. This is a whole Prometheus stack that will be deployed in this Helm chart. Now, what kind of data sources we will get open source for free out of the box, all right? And as we can see, we have a lot of data sources we can deploy, whatever you like. SQL, you see the list goes along. OpenSearch, you got Redis, a lot of data sources. You can implement it straightforward if you apply this Prometheus stack. Now, let's say we want to deploy some kind of a data source to monitor it, okay? All right, so here we are. Let's select, for example, MySQL database. Create a MySQL database. You give it a name, whatever name you want. Professor, MySQL DB, let's say, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and your credentials. Your host is, of course, your connection string, okay? You can add your username, password, if you use certificates, everything. You just click Save and Test. All right, data source updated. And in your connections, you can see that MySQL database is added. And you can start monitoring it with all the kinds of queries that you want. Now, what will happen if we will deploy something like this? Usually it's not that good, because a second ago we'll talk about the deployment, and we can see that it's deployed inside of the Grafana pod, and we all know that pods can die, and we will lose this whole setting that we just did. So what are our options and how we can make it persistent? But before we will talk how to make it persistent, let's talk about the concept that calls sidecars. Now, I have to press twice. Now, what are sidecars in Grafana? So in your Grafana pod, if you add in your Helm deployment a flag that is called sidecar data source enabled is true, what will happen? The Grafana pod will create an init container, okay, that calls data source, and it will scan your Kubernetes cluster for secrets or config maps. Of course, secrets if it's a database and you have to keep secrets in the YAML, with the label Grafana data source equals to true. Okay? If it finds it, and here is how we can provision the data source that we provisioned a second ago in code. So you can see this is a kind of secret. Grafana data source equals to true, and just a YAML with everything that we did a second ago manually. We all familiar with concepts as infra as a code, okay? Here we can provision data sources as code. What it gives us? We don't need no more persistent volumes, persistent volume claims, and external mounts. Me personally, I don't like to deal with mounts and volumes. Me, by keeping this configuration as code, every time the Grafana pods, even if it will die, you have pod restarted, maybe your EC2 instance will be restarted, the deployment will go up. It will scan your Kubernetes cluster with the configuration that you did, and we'll add it. And of course, we have the benefit now of using version control using Git. So if, for example, you changed your username, you add some kind of credentials, everything is in version control using Git, and we will see at the end how it will benefit us more. So this is not the only sidecar we can implement. Okay, we have sidecar for data sources. Of course, we'll have sidecars for dashboards, sidecar for alerts, and for notifiers. And here how the Docker containers will look inside of pods. You can see the alerts, the dashboards, the data sources, notifiers, and of course the Grafana itself. All right, now let's talk about dashboards as code. Okay, so how we add a dashboard in the Grafana? We just click on dashboards, and let's create a new sample dashboard. Okay, just click add visualization, and the options here are basically limitless. We'll also work on Prometheus. So here I have a very, very simple prompt commit that will show how much we have pods use their memory by percent. For example, I want to see if some of my pods use more memory than I told them to. Okay, let's see. Here we have just a very, very simple query. We apply it, and here we have a dashboard that will show pods memory by percentage of usage. Okay, we can see that only 2 pods are more than 80%. We save the dashboard. Let's give it some kind of a name. Very, very, very simple name for this demonstration. And here it is. We have a dashboard, okay, that will show us how much memory my pods are using. Now, how to provision this as code? We did it manually. So luckily, if you click on dashboard settings, okay, and go to JSON model, you will have all the JSON model of your dashboard. All you need to do is to copy this dashboard config, okay, and again, paste it in the config map or the secret. Here is the JSON model. This is all you need to do, to copy and paste it. And let's take a look at an example, okay. Again, it's a config map with Grafana dashboard equals to 1, and you just paste the JSON model here, and you have in your Kubernetes cluster and config map with the dashboard that you provisioned as code. What about alerts? Let's take our dashboard that we created a second ago, and let's say we want to give it an alert. Okay, here we give it an alert. personal alerts tab. And we want to create an alert, for example, if one of my pods exceeds its memory usage, okay? Here you can see, very, very easy. Right now we did that, it will alert me on if it's more than 0%. I clearly don't want that. Let's make it above, say for example, 80%, 50%, okay? If we'll preview, you see that most of the pods are firing, only 2 pods, some kind of job workers, are more than 50%, and I created an alert inside of the UI, okay, for my pods, okay? Now, how to provision alerts as code. Here you see only 2 pods are more than 50%. Not that straightforward, okay? We do have to get the model, the YAML model, other JSON model, we have to go to this external URL. But again, you export this code, again, of the alert. You just paste the alert ID, and you have the code. And again, YAMLs, all right? Right? It's a config map with the label Grafana alert, with rules.yaml, again, everything that we need, how we scan, interval scans, and so on. Now, it's not that straightforward, okay? So I do have a Medium article on how to provision this in more details. You can scan the QR code, okay, to get those examples and much more, okay, later on. And let's talk about the downsides, because it's, yeah, sure. All right. Yeah, you can scan it. You can also Google me. I'm not that famous, but that's okay? Yeah? All right. Great. What about the downsides? Okay, so based on personal experience, okay, this is not fully baked. It needs a little bit more documentation if you want to tweak it a bit more, as every Kubernetes resource we ever encountered with. And editing provision alerts is not that intuitive. It still requires create a copy in the UI before exporting to YAML. And of course, the biggest question is who in your team need to provision those dashboards. It's the R&D team, it's the data team. So it's a question you need to figure out inside of your company and your teams, okay? Now, what else can we add for better observability? And it's, of course, logs, okay? And we have a special add-on for Loki that's called, for Grafana, it's called Grafana Loki, okay? Not that Loki. And how we deploy it, again, we have a Helm chart, very, very simple Helm chart. You just add Helm Loki and you can install it on a separate namespace, it doesn't matter. And again, what it will deploy, we have your syslogs in your Docker containers that will send to Loki pod of Promptail that is provisioned on every node. It will then be written to some kind of Loki database. And again, pay attention, I put a $sign next to it because we will see that the options are pretty cheap. And everything will be visualized in the Grafana. So a quick look how Loki will look like. Okay, if you, again, in the Grafana, I go to the Explore tab. Okay. And here you can just filter logs by whatever you want, okay? You can have line contains, you can add some kind of operations, formats, if it's a JSON file, log format file, filter with the line contains something, logging system. Again, it's an open source, straight out of the box, you just deploy it, it's an add-on to Grafana, and you can start receiving logs from your cluster right here, okay? What are the benefits of using Loki? So the types of storage. We can store the logs in S3, in DynamoDB, Google Storage. The options are very, they provide a lot of options. And pay attention that by saving the logs in S3, okay, we save a lot of money, okay? Now, because we they give us the option to provision logs and S3. The question is raised, well, how about performance? Because if I store logs on some kind of other data source, how the performance is. Now, based on my experience, Loki provides very, very good out-of-the-box indexing, and I can even store like 5 months before logs and retrieve them, I don't know, like a week of logs, let's say, I don't know, 5,000 lines of logs in a matter of seconds, okay? And it's very, very cheap because logs basically are like text files stored in S3, okay? And we all know S3 object storage is pretty cheap. And we can configure this whole thing again as code in Helm charts. So let's take an example how we can configure Loki as code. So here we just say what kind of type of storage we want, an S3, okay? We can even say what our retention periods, okay? We can choose retention periods here, or maybe we can choose retention periods inside of S3 itself, depends on you, how you want to manage that. You add your role, and you can get logs right in your cluster. What kind of other additional deployments and feature we can use by provisioning Grafana, Prometheus, and Loki as code? We can leverage this by adding kube state matrix from your Kubernetes matrix, node exporters for your node matrices. If your company works with some kind of an Okta SAML, you can configure it here also. TLS, ingresses, you can all modify it here, even though it's open source. Even the open source option gives you these options, okay? Traces, you can use Grafana tempo, and so on. And the last thing I want to talk to you about is, now that everything is code, everything inside of the Git repository, we have an option now to use GitOps and Argo CD to deploy this whole stack. How we can leverage this GitOps and Argo CD for this deployment? So we will have your monitoring folder, again, with the 2 Argo applications, okay? You just add the repo URL of your Helm chart, okay? This is the root folder. Then, for example, you have your develop environment, or you can add your staging environment, production A, production B, okay? So in your, say for example, your development environment, you will have your customize, of course, that is resource and patches strategic merge on your monitoring folder, okay? 2 files, the Prometheus stack YAML and Loki stack, because each environment has its own credentials, has its own stuff. So here is where you will provision your configuration for each environment, okay? Yeah, sure, go back. Some of you wants to take pictures. All right? And at the end, here is how our develop environment will look like. You have a folder of data sources YAML, a lot of YAMLs for all the data sources. For example, your develop environment has an RDS, has a document DB, MongoDB, whatever. The data sources will be saved as YAMLs here. Dashboards, all right? For example, you want to add a dashboard only for your develop environment, you can put it here. But what it gives us, it will have another folder, for example, a staging folder and a production folder. For example, you want to copy paste the same dashboards, the same alerts between environments, you can just copy paste the same things. Okay, you can copy, all include, exactly, or include here. You can play with this however you want, okay? And you will have your develop folder, staging folder, production A, production B. Everything will sit in Git. And once you change, for example, your YAML for, let's say, for alert 1, you want to add another alert, you just push it to Git, Argo CD syncs it from your Kubernetes cluster, your Grafana init containers, the sidecars that we talked at the beginning, will scan, and it will be deployed. So, for summary and conclusion, what do we talk today? We literally went step by step to show you maybe an alternative for creating a full monitoring and observability solution. We presented an easy, low price, because it's really open source way for full monitoring, alerting, logging, and analytics solution for your product with Prometheus, Grafana, and Loki. The most important thing is by using Kubernetes configuration files, right, config maps, and secrets, we removed the need for creating external persistent volumes and amounts for dashboards, alerts, and logs. Okay? And at the end, we showed how it is to maintain and deploy the stack between environments using Argo CD. Thank you for listening. We still have a few minutes for Q&A. I left it exactly for people who maybe like to ask something, how we did it maybe in one of projects that I worked on. Yeah, sure, you have. Yeah. That's a great question. We went before that. What? Yeah, so we asked, what about if you have some kind of authorization issues with the logs I can even tell about for your databases or stuff like this. So before that, we've seen the deployment we can leverage, again, Kubernetes config files. For example, keep all your credentials as a secret, and everything is YAML, okay? Eventually, everything is YAML, okay? And you can keep secrets, for example, in your external secrets in AWS, okay? And that your YAML files will take all the authorization stuff, everything that you need from the external secrets. But again, it depends, how each one of us will decide to do that. Maybe you're not AWS native, maybe you're a Google native or Azure native, okay? But Kubernetes is for everyone, okay? I hope that answers your question. You want to ask something before that? Sorry. Again, that's a very good question. The Grafana operator itself, it's a Grafana pod, okay? You have the Docker of Grafana itself. By adding what I've shown before, okay, by adding it's in the pod itself. We all know that pods can contain a lot of Docker containers. These containers are an init containers that before spinning up the Grafana operator, they spin up to scan your Kubernetes cluster for these configuration files. So when your Grafana operator, okay, is up, you will have everything. You will have your data sources, your dashboards, your alerts, okay? They're init container. Before the Grafana operator starts, they scan your Kubernetes, they scan your cluster, and then they apply it to the Grafana, and when the Grafana will be up, you will have everything there, okay? You can test it. It's pretty easy and straightforward. Yeah, last question. Sorry, we have like a minute. By the way, I will still be here asking more questions if someone will want to talk to me one-on-one. Yeah, sure.
Are you doing any templating of your dashboards and alerts?
That's a
making Helm charts out of them?
great. That's a great question. Of course, as I said, let me go back a few slides. I like to have consistency between my environments. So if I created, for example, customer engagement dashboard, I will deploy it on all the environments. These are just copy-pasted between the environments.
Different variables in the dashboard. So you said do separate folders for staging and not staging.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to change something inside the dashboard of the alert itself.
So you just change it in the YAML itself. For example, let's take an example here. In your dashboard 1.yaml, for example, the dashboard my time is up in a few seconds, so I just answer a question. We can discuss it after this. In your dashboard 1.yaml, in the develop environment, you change exactly what you want. Guys, thank you very much for listening, okay? I will stay here, answer any questions. I have a lot of hands risen, so yeah, thank you.